Hello. As requested, this is my mid-semester self-assessment, so I will begin with talking about Engage and Persist. This example of the exploration that I provided is an example of me engaging and persisting because after I turned in this exploration a couple weeks ago, I got the feedback from Patrick talking about how this could be a good introduction to an observational drawing or painting from our students to do afterwards. So I really just took that comment into consideration and I wanted to write it down and stick it in my sketchbook for a potential future tool for my tool belt as a teacher to provide an art experience for my students. I'll move on to talk a little bit about Brainy. I was lucky enough to be able to do 2 weeks in a row. So the first week when I was doing Brainy, I was kind of unsure, didn't really know what to expect the first go around. So the first week was definitely just like a learning experience where I kind of figured out what worked well with some groups may not work the same way or as well with other groups. And I took what I learned from day one and applied it to the second round of Brainy where I went, just to be flexible and allowing kids to either move throughout the museum quickly if that's what they want to do, or slow down and take their time and draw things if they choose to do so. And for this final point on Engage and Persist, I will talk about the recent assignment that we just turned in, the biography of an artwork. This was an example of assignment where I really had to go back a couple times and revise my thinking and writing before I felt comfortable enough to turn it in. With this assignment, I just really wanted to communicate my story and my idea clearly and articulate it in a way that made sense to me and as well as the reader, along with explaining the meaning behind one of my photography pieces. So the little clip that I have, or the little snippet I have provided from my paper is an example of a passage where I basically had to go back 3 or 4 different times and reword it and retweak it because this passage, it seemed like especially kind of was funky and I didn't like how it flowed with the rest of my story. So overall, I would say I'm doing pretty well with engaging and persisting. Obviously, I will try and build on these skills as I move along in the program and beginning my teaching practice. So I'll move on to talk about dependability. I feel very confident that I'm a dependable person. I pride myself in being dependable. I haven't missed a day of class. I haven't missed a meeting with my service learning group or a service learning meeting, or I haven't been late to any of those. Service learning or Brainy, anything like that. I have been late a couple times to class because of my time conflict with Gary in the photo wing, but I do everything in my best ability to try and give at least some heads up that I might be running late. Sometimes it's hard, but I do what I can and will continue to hold myself to that high standard. Moving on to talk about reflect and evaluate. Overall, just the reflection blogs I think is a good example of my reflection and my thinking in terms of teaching. After I kind of learned the learning curve of how to document student learning and record their comments onto the blog page, I have found that this really helps me look back and gain a better insight and understanding to what my students have learned. And I like being able to take what they have learned and kind of compare it to our original learning targets in our lesson plan and see if they match up or how well they match up and see how we did in that regard. And then just kind of talking about the blogs a little bit more specifically here. First go around of blogs, we did not include any videos, we just included pictures. Second round, we included a handful of videos. And overall, I think having videos is a really good tool to include for this reflection process because I'm able now to look back and see exactly what my students were doing for that class period or that project. Talk a little bit about journal reflections, the ones we do right after teaching. I overall think that these are really important and I try and take these as serious as I can. I try and write these pretty much the day of or right after when we teach so everything is still fresh in my mind and I don't forget anything. And basically, I really enjoy talking about what went well. That's always something to hold yourself high to when you are reflecting about your teaching experience, but it's also nice to be able to look back and talk about maybe what didn't go so well and what you would change differently for the future the next time that you teach. Wrap up this point with lesson planning. This is an example personally where you have to do a lot of reflection and evaluating what you're doing before you actually commit to it. I really appreciate the comments that both Allison and Patrick provide to us on those lesson plans is it's good to have a couple extra sets of eyes glance over and just kind of peek and see what we're going to be doing, and it'll be a good fit for our students in the upcoming days. Just overall, I think that I do a good job of reflection and evaluating what I'm doing as an educator. But again, just as I continue in the program and start my practice, I'm going to still try and build and hone on these skills just a little bit more. So now we can move on to observe. I will just say right off the bat, doing this presentation and kind of piecing together evidence, this is something that I'm still developing at and will need to be more attentive of in the future in the program and as I progress to work in schools. So I wanted to put these two explorations specifically up because I think these are the best representations of what a good observation skills kind of look like from my point of view. And yeah, without further ado, the image of the left is the most recent exploration I turned in, exploration 19, where found paint was part of the exercise, and just looking in the environment and the world around you to find things that may be used as pigments that aren't necessarily traditional pigments. And overall, I just thought this helped me observe the world in a different way, because I don't always look at a pile of mud and think that it'll be able to be used on a canvas. And it was interesting just kind of looking at non-traditional art materials and creating them as art materials, because they do have a different feel, a different sense of different quality when you are painting with them. For example, like Dayquil and Nyquil is not something you would traditionally see in an art piece, but it was fun experimenting with it, and it helps me build those observation skills further. And then talking about exploration, I briefly mentioned at the beginning of this, this exploration was where I walked from the UCA to my job at Lake Street Market. Not a very far walk, about a quarter mile or so, but just really being in tune and finding things to look at and write down in my journal became a really key exercise in my eyes, because I was able to really hone in and focus and notice the little details on this short walk, and able to come up with 50 different things using all my senses to put into my journal. So I'll wrap up this with talking about studio art, praxis, symbol, and presence. I really enjoyed this reading, but the first couple assigned sections especially were kind of tough for me to read. It was very dense, so I had to go back 2-3 times and pick up more information and reread again and again to pick up on a bunch of things I missed the first go around, because there was a lot of good points presented in this reading. Move on to envision and plan, the other assessment standard. Lesson planning naturally goes under here, and for me, it has been a really good experience, it's a really good habit for me to get into, because I didn't realize how important planning was as a teacher. It's so important to try and plan for every minute of a 90-minute class period, and also to potentially overplan for the most part. You don't know what may or may not unfold in 90 minutes or whatever class period time you're working with. So overall, I think this is a good example of me envisioning and planning, and when I create these lesson plans with my group, I try and envision myself teaching it to kind of help gain a better understanding of what may or may not go well during a teaching experience. Then I want to talk a little about the textbook that we read, Differentiated Instruction in Art. I think this is a good tool for me especially, and for everybody else to read through, because it's able to put it in terms of how to be a good teacher and a good art teacher. So it was nice to be able to read a little bit further into differentiating your instruction, and then also provides really nice tips, just how to overall be a good teacher. For example, like learning stuff about your student's background and being able to apply that to your lesson plans. And I have to say that has become really important in us developing lesson plans and art experiences for our service learning students, because we want to keep them engaged to the fullest and make art exciting for them. So that's why I really like this textbook that we're reading. I'm able to take the information and kind of put it into my planning state and just think about it as we're making art experiences for students. We'll move on to understanding. I put up this painting that I made for our second meeting with the students of Cooper Home. We did acrylic paint on canvas, and I find it very important for myself, especially to create the art with our students, so I can be able to show them in class and bring a hard copy to them of what we're going to be doing in class today, and also to kind of refresh my mind on some of the abilities and limitations of a medium that we're working with. With acrylic paint, for example, I've worked with it extensively in the past, but recently I haven't so much, so I wanted to just kind of brush up and rehash those ideas of what works well with acrylic paint or what may not work so well with acrylic paint, and that'll help me better teach my students and help them problem solve through things that may come up in a lesson. And then I'll talk a little bit about early childhood art, the stuff that we've been kind of talking about the past couple class periods. I find this really interesting, number one, and I think it's important for me to understand going into the education field how to kind of talk about students' artwork to people like students' parents or administrators and kind of talk about it in these terms, because I have learned that drawing and making art for young children especially is very important developmentally, and allowing them to communicate further by communicating ideas, and then later on reading and writing. So I wanted to put this in this presentation because I feel this is really helping me understand what it means to be an art teacher and how important arts are for young students. Then I'll wrap up this point with talking about Allison Cope's guest lecture way at the beginning of the semester. I felt that this talk really gave me a good understanding of working with our students of special abilities for our service learning groups. She really gave us some good activities and good insights through those activities on what it's like to potentially overload somebody's brain and just how to work with and differentiate your teaching process so the abilities of all of our learners can be met. So I've taken what she has talked about way at the beginning of the semester and been applying it to each meeting in each lesson plan meeting about constructing art experiences for these students. We'll wrap up with talking about Express. Overall, I think this is another aspect where I'm kind of developing and could definitely see some improvement on in the future, but I will talk about the main thing I want to express as a teacher, as an art teacher through my work, and I want this to be communicated to my students, that art, there's a lot of meaning associated with art. So I put up this little sketch of a monster that I created with watercolor for our last art experience for the students of Cooper Home, and told the students a little story behind it too, in hopes that they would do something very similar. Then the student examples of artwork on the right, I think, demonstrate a great job of our students expressing their art ideas, their interests through their art project, through the name tags that they created. So that is something that I felt was really successful, as we were trying to communicate to them that art can express meaning, and our students all did a really excellent job of painting things or drawing things that had personal meaning to them. So moving back and talking about journal reflections a little bit again, I like these journal reflections because I'm able to express kind of how important teaching art is to me and basically my love for it. So I really like doing that, and I think these journal reflections are a good representation of the joy and the pleasure that I have when teaching art to students. Then I will wrap this presentation up with talking about our biography of an artwork again that we just recently turned in. I was able to, in this writing, express the meaning of my own practice in photo image making, and talk about how important that image that I wrote about in the paper, but just overall how important photography has been to me as a person and as an artist. And just I was glad to be able to express my love for the medium and in hopes to, maybe one day influence another student to find their love for art as well. So thank you for listening. That was my mid-semester evaluation, kind of where I'm at right now, I think. So as always, comments, questions, or feedback is greatly appreciated. Thank you.